Hello, I'm Donna Cryer. I am the founder and CEO of the Global Liver Institute, the world's largest liver patient advocacy organization. We convene more than 200 stakeholders across our councils, campaigns, and events, such as today's International NASH Day, to advance liver health as public health and to scale optimal approaches to improving the lives of people and their families who are living with liver disease. On today's panel for International NASH Day, I'm joined by our guests from across the United States, across different stakeholder groups and parts of the healthcare system, who will be talking to us about leading models for care in NASH. One of the reasons that our theme for this NASH Day is Stop NASH Now is that there are so many things that we can do today to improve care for NASH. And I'm so excited that I have with us the just best people possible to be able to do that. With me, I have Dr. Naim Alkhouri, who is VP of Academic Affairs and the head of the Fatty Liver Program at Arizona Liver Health. I have Dr. Amreen Dinani, who is Associate Professor of Medicine at Duke University. And bells ring out when I call her name because she's that special. I have Dr. Michael Fuchs, who is Professor of Medicine and Chief of Gastroenterology, Hepatology, and Liver Transplantation at Central Virginia VA healthcare system. So it's so important to have the military and the Veterans Health Administration represented in this conversation. We also have with us Dr. Sonal Kumar, who is Director of Clinical Hepatology at Weill Cornell. And we have Joe Rubinsztain, Dr. Joe Rubinsztain, who is CEO and co-founder of Cronwell, to sprinkle a little innovation dust on this conversation today. So without further ado, here is our panel. Welcome to everyone. Please say hi to our guests, our audience. Joe, Naim, Michael, Amreen, just an opportunity to say hello to folks.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Donna and the Global Liver Institute for doing this podcast for International NASH Day. We really appreciate what you guys are doing in the field of hepatology. As you always say, liver disease is underdiagnosed, misdiagnosed, and undertreated. And we all need to help raise awareness and alert public health experts about the really pandemic of chronic liver disease globally. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you as well from my side and our side here at Cronwell. Like you said, we're here both to sprinkle and to gather innovation in this panel. You know, there is a lot of dust flying, which is good dust. So it is magical, and I look forward to joining this great panel here.
Yeah, thank you, Donna, for having me join this group. I think it is important to give the perspective of somebody who works at a Veterans Affairs hospital. Although I have to admit, I'm not talking on behalf of the Department of Veterans Affairs, so it's my personal. But the way I work and see it, so I think at some point reflects how the department will probably look at NAFLD care. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Donna, and thank you for GLI for putting this together. I'm delighted that we're doing a session like this, and I'm really excited to learn from our other systems. How can we be innovative? How can we think of ways to really deliver care to this huge patient population that's really underserved?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for inviting me to join this panel. Just echoing what everyone else said, this is such a huge issue, and we're really honored to be here and excited to have this discussion today.
So one of the reasons that we pulled together this panel, out of all the possible issues that we could highlight in NAFLD and NASH in 2022, is that I often hear, well, if you've seen one model of care or for NASH patients, or you've seen one NASH patient treated, you've seen one NASH patient treated. And so there seems to be a great diversity of care models and of ways to diagnose and manage patients. And we wanted to spotlight some of them, particularly as we are now having more pathways and guidelines coming out. And so, as each of you represent different models for connecting and coordinating patients, I'd like to go back through and give you all each a little bit of time to describe the model of care that you've put together for fatty liver disease and NASH patients. And I'll start with you, Dr. Kumar.
Yeah, so I'm at Cornell, and we created the iChange Clinic here. It stands for the Innovative Center for Health and Nutrition in Gastroenterology. And the goal of our clinic is to have a multidisciplinary approach to the management of patients with fatty liver disease. We all know that there's an integration of other metabolic diseases. And so we have a standalone clinic where we have endocrinologists, a cardiologist, dietitians, all sitting at the same table and talking about patients. And we see patients on the same day. So similar to like multidisciplinary clinics in oncology, we have a similar model of care. We do this once a week, and we get our referrals from mainly primary care providers.
Fantastic. Dr. Dinani, how does that compare with how you practice?
So, I just transitioned from Mount Sinai to Duke. So a lot of the stuff I will be telling you about is stuff that I've started up at Mount Sinai, which will be transitioning to Duke University. So one of the things, probably more preliminary than Dr. Kumar is we did just start up a multidisciplinary clinic. Like you mentioned earlier, one care model doesn't really work for another healthcare system. So while we both are in New York City, our systems work quite differently. So in terms of our approach for a multidisciplinary clinic, it's kind of delivered at multiple sites. It all just depends on where the patient is being seen. And there's always a champion in endocrinology at all the different sites at Mount Sinai. The other part that we integrated into our system is how do we actually channel the right type of patients into such multidisciplinary care or specialty care? And what we did was we have tried to streamline the way patients come to hepatology clinic or specialty clinic. So we integrated the FIB4 calculation into our EMR, and then automated interpretation of the different, numbers or the scoring systems that come out of, the calculation, and then have provided some initial advice as to what are your next steps. Keep them in primary care. Would this person benefit from seeing just an endocrinologist? Does this person need to see a hepatologist? And then that has created automatic links to putting in referrals to healthcare systems, putting in referrals for FibroScan evaluation. So we've worked heavily on the referral side and just started up the multidisciplinary clinic.
Excellent. So we have a co-location model. We have a tech EHR enabled model. This is exciting. Dr. Fuchs, tell us about how you're coordinating and putting together care.
So I want to give you a perspective at the VA level, how the VA is approaching it right now, and then give you some perspective what we have done, because you need to understand that they are not the same resources available at every VA hospital. Right. So for those who have no idea what the VA is, how it works, just very briefly, it is really the oldest and formally organized national integrated healthcare system globally, and will take care of about 9 million veterans. And about 70% of those are probably older than in the community. So they are 55 years and older. So VA has about 140 to 150 larger hospitals and more than 1,300 outpatient sites. So when we look at the burden of NAFLD from a healthcare system perspective, then there is a compelling imperative for action, considering that we have about 2 million veterans in care that have NAFLD. We have about 6.5 million people that are either overweight or obese. Type 2 diabetes is about 2.5 times higher in veterans among non-veterans. And consider that 4% of the pharmacy budget of the VA, about 1.5 billion US dollars, is just spent for diabetes care. So with this in mind, so in a long-standing interest in NAFLD, I have started to lobby really with the Department of Veterans Affairs to come up with a NAFLD action plan. And the original goal was to really, we need to address awareness of the disease, not only among providers, but also patients. And critically is that we need to standardize how we diagnose and risk stratify, and then really come up with a kind of develop standardized patient management and treatment plan. And it has taken until earlier this year that VA, under the leadership of Dr. Tim Morgan, has done, I think, what is a fantastic job, and that is putting together a truly interdisciplinary approach to develop guidance for the VA healthcare system how to address NAFLD. And what I mean with truly, interdisciplinary is that we had, primary care on board, endocrinology, hepatology, pathology, laboratory medicine, nutrition, food services, pharmacy benefits management, population health, the VA MAID management program. And we came up with some guidance how to diagnose, risk stratify, intervene, and how to monitor patients. So I think at this point on a national level, I think we have a strong foundation to start really developing a comprehensive healthcare system approach to NAFLD. Now, on a local side, we have started early on to what others already have said, put together a multidisciplinary clinic, but led under, truly guided by hepatology. And the goal was that our hepatologists need also to be aware and capable to address and treat obesity and be knowledgeable in mental health, because you have to look at the patient as a whole and not just from your isolated liver perspective.
There are two, that was so very rich, but there were two pieces of the conversation I want to come back to in a moment. One is what does guided by hepatology mean? So the relative roles of different specialties in these models, and the other is the thought of standardizing something that's so heterogeneous, or a patient population that is so heterogeneous. But we'll get to those. Dr. Alkhouri, tell us about how you are organizing care.
Yeah, this is great to hear the different care models. We are a private hepatology practice, so we try to target upstream and increase awareness in the community. So we do a lot of education for primary care doctors, talk about the new guidelines, talk about how to implement the FIB-4 index and their daily management of patients with suspected NAFLD, when to refer to us. But we also have this open door for FibroScan. So we offer FibroScan to anyone who's interested in the state of Arizona. We have offices in Phoenix and Tucson, and we do it completely for free. So we tell the primary care doctors, gastro doctors, endocrinologists that if you have patients with suspected NAFLD or at risk for NAFLD, like patients with type 2 diabetes, that we are happy to see them just to do a free FibroScan. And this has been a success story, at least for us in our practice, because we see patients that come for the FibroScan and they only have NAFLD but no evidence of any fibrosis, and these are the patients that we say, okay, you need to work on your lifestyle intervention and work with your primary care doctor on managing your diabetes and hypertension, metabolic syndrome components, but come back in a year and we can do another free FibroScan. But by doing this, we're able to identify also high-risk patients. Many times we identify patients with cirrhosis or advanced fibrosis that, they become our patients in the practice. And then we offer them clinical trials, which is something that I'm very passionate about, and we can maybe discuss later. But also we provide, top-notch hepatology care for them. And we also work with their primary care doctors on optimizing the management of diabetes, which is very important because we have newer drugs that have positive impact on NAFLD compared to some older drugs that may actually make it worse, and there is room for improvement often in these patients. So this is how we do it. Very different than big academic centers, but I think we complement each other.
I think that's very exciting to be able to pull the lens back a little bit and be able to capture in a way people at earlier stages. At GLI we like to say there should be a solution for every stage, and so but that's only possible if you're interacting with people at all of those stages to be able to pair them with the right level of intensity of intervention. So that's very exciting. Dr. Rubinsztain, you have a completely different background, which I'd love for you to share with our audience, and then you have a unique solution.
Absolutely. Well, I'm a physician at training. I'm a technologist at heart, and I've always worked on creating electronic health record systems, or today trying to build a solution that effectively takes all these great ideas and sprinkles them across a very large population. And that area is called digital therapeutics, in which we enable doctors to treat thousands of patients, not tens of patients, under these algorithms. And so it's funny when I hear every care model, I hear two people in my mind. One is essentially every patient needs a specialized solution, and another one basically saying, I will build any car you want as long as it's black, which is the Henry Ford production model. And we know that not all patients need a black car. And so how do you marry those two concepts and are effectively able to treat thousands of, if not millions of people? And the interesting thing is, as you're looking at the different models of care and treatment that are coming through, the AASLD or the AGA or several others, they're all confluencing around a first-tier screening process that has to do with a FIB-4 scoring, and then eventually moving on to other more specialized models that involve FibroScan or that involve specialized tests, blood tests in particular. The question is, how do you uncover the 80 or 85% of people that don't have it, versus how do you treat the 15% of people that we know have the condition? We rely on doctors to understand specifically, what are the specifics of the care plan. But what we try to do is, number one, we uncover those additional 85% through advanced technology tools and population health. And number two is, once we've detected a patient, everybody mentions a multi-specialty component, which includes behavioral health, which includes dietary health, which includes lifestyle interventions and potentially type 2 diabetes drugs or
Okay.
Not sure what that was.
Okay.
But if you uncover those 85% of people that truly need it, how do you deliver that en masse? Because there's not enough behavioral therapists or nutritionists or primary care doctors that are well paid to treat those patients. So we're trying to build the robots or the extender arms that allow this great panel to deliver that care to thousands, not tens of patients.
So personalization at scale. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Alkhouri, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to follow up on what Joe was saying. This is very important, this whole area of digital therapeutics. So when we talk about, health apps, there are probably three categories. You have these general health apps like MyFitnessPal or Map My Run, that they, help people become healthier.
Mute yourself. Yeah. Okay.
They can track their nutrition and exercise. The second tier is maybe some specialized apps that try to help with weight loss. Let's say like the Noom app. These provide dietary counseling and exercise regimens and potentially some cognitive behavioral therapy, but you don't need a physician to prescribe them. They're not going through the process of getting FDA approval. And then I think the highest tier is what we call prescription digital therapeutics, and this is what Joe and others are developing, where these apps will actually undergo the whole process of getting FDA approval for a specific indication or disease. So let's say for NASH, they would need to design clinical trials, have the app and maybe a sham app, and compare the outcomes, and the outcomes are the same that we have in pharma-sponsored clinical trials. So they can be improvement in liver biochemistries or MRI, PDFF, MR elastography, all the way to potentially doing trials comparing improvement on liver biopsy. And the idea is when you get these approved, that they will be actually prescribed by a physician for a patient with a specific disease, and hopefully get also insurance coverage so the patients are not paying for these apps. And we are hoping that this will be the way in the future, so we can actually provide that high-level multidisciplinary care even in smaller private practice offices.
So if I were playing NASH bingo, that would have been the first time biopsy landed on my card. So what I didn't hear before that was in your discussions of all the different models was liver biopsy with various types of non-invasive diagnostics. Is that intentional, Dr. Kumar, the place for non-invasive diagnostics and being able to scale the care that for the numbers of people that will need?
Yeah, I mean, remember, we're talking about a disease process, whether, across the spectrum, that affects 25 to 30% of the population. We can't be doing liver biopsies in all of those patients. And so we need some way, and we can't even manage those patients with medications, right? So we need some way to risk stratify these patients, and it has to be non-invasive. It has to be, something that's straightforward, for the referring providers, and something that's straightforward for us as well to manage. So it has to, if we're talking liver biopsy, you really have to pick out who truly needs a liver biopsy. But a lot of it can be avoided with non-invasive markers.
Absolutely. And I had pointed out, I remember in the beginnings of this conversation of getting beyond the biopsy, that I could take all of the non-invasive diagnostics in the same time as I would lie there, trying not to bleed out from a liver biopsy. And I've had 6 of them. And so it's exciting that we've come to an order of non-invasive diagnostics and are better able to sort of assign them different uses, which one for diagnosis, which ones for staging, which ones for treatment response, which ones are, in a clinical research environment. But from a patient point of view, I was like, we can just do all of them and get all of the information rather than you puncturing me in the side. So I'm very excited that certainly clinical care, and then the guidelines will catch up to that. Has it been helpful? And I'll come to you, Dr. Dinani, as you going between 2 different academic settings. Has it been helpful as you've explained the needs for these care models and these resources within institutions in New York and at Duke, that we now have American Heart Association scientific statements about, the connections between cardiovascular disease and NAFL. We now have, ACE guidelines. We'll soon have new, ASLD guidelines. That there is now, we have the AGA clinical pathway. That there's finally sort of a formal medical society recognition and consensus around, the importance of treating fatty liver disease patients. Has that helped you sort of make your case for these models within your institutions?
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, it's exciting to see over the last couple of years that a lot of these major society guidelines are all bringing NAFLD to the forefront, recognizing that it is something that we're all dealing with in multiple specialties. And the nice thing is that there's recognition that there is an overlap, that we share lots of phenotypic characteristics within all these specialties. And if you think about the fundamental care of the patient as a whole, yes, as hepatologists, we are worried about liver health and prevention of progressive disease, prevention of cirrhosis, and HCC and liver transplantation. But at the end of the day, these patients are at risk for cardiovascular, cardiometabolic disease. A lot of these patients are pre-diabetic. They are dealing with weight. They're dealing with diabetes. So to get the buy-in or to get advocates in other specialties, I think over time, over the last several years at least, that I've been doing this has been easier. Initially, it's much harder. So there was a lot of work on the grounds initially, going out to primary care, educating them like, hey, you see someone with type 2 diabetes, as much, you think about neuropathy, you think about their annual kidney exam, you think about their eye exams, but hey, maybe we should think about liver health as well. And over time, what's happened is now I reached a point where if I saw a primary care referral, if I saw someone's name, I knew exactly why they were referring that patient to me. And what was really neat and innovative also was that when we integrated certain things that made interpretation easier for them and also educated them on things that they should already be doing, a lot of those things have already been taken. So I think we are making progress, very slowly, but we are making progress. But I think one of the things that gels it all together is we are dealing with all of us are dealing with very similar patient populations, but we just have a specific focus.
Right. And Dr. Fuchs, you absolutely talked about ensuring that all of those various needs of veterans, whether with diabetes or obesity, or their high cholesterol or their liver needs, that this is an opportunity, fatty liver disease and NASH is an opportunity to really address all of these. Getting a little feedback. So Dr. Fuchs, across the different care settings that veterans might find themselves in, different VA hospitals around the country, or some who are receiving care in non-VA settings, what are the elements that you would want to make sure that each of them has access to?
So let me first apologize for some of the background noise, but we have heavy construction going on. So I think, my organization is a little bit different, obviously. And, you talked about, guidelines, recommendations from different, national societies coming out. This is not necessarily what my organization as a whole healthcare system is necessarily following. So the VA follows, the United States Task Force, and unfortunately there is nothing yet. So that's why the VA, so that's why the VA, actually, looks obviously at those different guides. But we have to, come up with something, built from inside our healthcare system. And while those even our guidance, is very useful, we have to fill it with life and meat. So, just putting out some recommendation, it does not mean it's implemented. So I think we are just at the start to implement it. That requires, you have to start with primary care, because that's where the majority of patients are. So you have to develop good relationship with your primary care. You cannot set up a care or diagnostic algorithm without closely collaborating with primary care, because if you don't do that, they are not utilizing it unless you put up a system where you punish your primary care by putting up metrics. But you don't want to do that. I mean, we need to really understand the challenges that primary care has and what kind of metrics they already have to meet. So we have to closely work with them. And Same holds true for how we educate primary care or even their patients. So we need to talk with our primary care. It's not just making a video or putting out a pamphlet. I think you need input from primary care so that it sticks, that it's distributed, and involve them and engage them in the entire care of NAFLD. I think that is very crucial from a healthcare system-wide perspective.
Dr. Alkhouri, in addition to the community-based work, which you must touch a lot of primary care physicians, you do connect patients to research. How do primary care physicians, react to that? We often hear that they don't refer patients to clinical trials because they're afraid of losing them. Maybe they're not afraid of losing NASH patients, but how does connecting patients to clinical research opportunities coincide with other care paths that they might take?
Yeah, I agree. It takes a lot of education, and that's why we like to connect with our referring physicians on a regular basis. We actually do programs. Sometimes we go to their offices and do a lunch and learn. We do sometimes dinner programs for them and talk about clinical trials, what's coming next. And I think just telling them about the process and making sure they understand that it's not about one clinical trial. It's just one way we take care of patients and provide them with access to newer therapeutics. So I think educating them about the placebo fact that more people are usually on effective treatments than placebo. Majority of trials we have, they do 2 patients on active treatment, 1 patient on placebo. Some trials even have 80% on active treatment, 20% on placebo. We talk about the fact that most patients in the placebo arm see benefits in the context of NAFLD. We always debate the placebo response when we design clinical trials, but actually for the patients being in a clinical trial, even if they're in the placebo arm, typically they see some benefit. We also talk about some of the medicines that are in NASH clinical trials that are actually FDA approved for other indications. The example is semaglutide, for example. And I tell them that we're not going to learn anything new about semaglutide if we are doing a clinical trial in NASH, except its efficacy on NASH and liver fibrosis and other liver biomarkers. But we know everything we need to know about its safety and long-term effects on diabetes, weight loss, cardiovascular outcomes. So that's important for the patients and providers to understand. We also talk to them about the different phases of clinical trials and the difference between a phase 3 trial where we know a lot about the safety and efficacy of the medicine compared to a phase 1 trial where basically the patients are helping medicine and science understand how these new drugs are being metabolized, and we do what we call pharmacokinetic trials and things like that. So very different mindsets in terms of what phase of a clinical trial you are in. We make everyone feel comfortable when they're in a clinical trial. We say we want to do everything in a transparent way. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach to the principal investigator, which is myself or some of my partners. And I think having a physician who understands the data behind the different medications and is able to answer questions for the patients, it makes them feel more comfortable because usually they have many questions. And the same thing happens with the providers also. They have questions about the trials, what's involved for the patients. And the key is to say that, again, this is a journey and this is just part of it. And after the trial, they will still be followed by us in hepatology, and they will always go back to you as their primary care physician.
I think that feedback loop, that connection for both the patient and the primary care physician are so important. And knowing that you are part of that community and will be part of that community for a long time, not just coming in and out to do a specific trial, I'm sure builds trust and relationship.
If I can just chime in.
Please.
I agree with Naim completely. I think one of the big things is that patients and also, primary care providers worry about is is this going to interfere with their standard of care of other medical, their other medical issues? And I am a strong advocate for being in a clinical trial is just an additional layer of things that we're going to try to do to help your disease. So if you need to be on a diabetes medication because your hemoglobin A1C is uncontrolled, then that's what we need to do. And this might not be the opportune time to get you into a trial. And we will get you in when it's appropriate. So I think some of that feedback, going back and forth with them is really, really reassuring, not just to the clinician, but also to the patient. Simple things like statin therapy. If you need to be on it, you need to be on it. And that's what we will do. But the other big thing I also advocate for in our patients who are in clinical trials is the more you see us, and unfortunately they do see us quite a bit. If it's not just us, it's our research coordinators. It's kind of the reinforcement that, it's kind of like a check-in about your overall health. And that probably factors into some of that placebo response as well. But it's just overall, just being in a clinical trial will generally improve your health because you're getting this extra check-in from healthcare,
Right.
To just help you and answer some of your questions. So I definitely, use that approach.
Dr. Rubinsztain, as you are trying to look at this space, you have sort of the luxury of being able to assemble best-in-class elements, of your choosing, to address this problem. But sometimes when people, though, they hear digital therapeutics, they hear, oh, well, that's only going to be for one segment of society. How can using digital therapeutics actually help sort of democratize access to appropriate fatty liver disease care?
Thanks, Donna. I was exactly heading there. I mean, if you look at the macro trends, you always have to follow the patient to deliver the right treatment, but you also have to follow the money in order to impact everybody, right? And some of the key things that we're hearing from this panel is, look, we are one important disease for which not many are aware, and especially doctors who are constantly competing for time and for priority on treating other conditions that are usually associated to fatty liver disease. And so the short answer to that question is, number one is you tap existing reimbursement mechanisms that will enable the doctor to deliver the treatment at least at a profitable level, if not at a break-even level, because it's impossible to deliver care in a multidisciplinary environment based on current Medicare standards only, unless you automate something. So that's number one. Number two is you offer an opportunity to treat the patient with its multiple metabolic conditions, not just one. You effectively bring a way to feel, or to have the physician not be hindered by, okay, here's one more component to your practice. Here is fatty liver, and here's what you need to do, and give us control of that, and you take care of the rest. On the contrary, you tap existing reimbursement mechanisms. You create a centralized, intelligent core that automates a lot of the work and coordinates the work when necessary. And you create a collaboration environment that doesn't necessarily take the patient away from all the stakeholders in the environment. And then, when possible, you eliminate any payment from the patient so that everyone has access to it. So every program that we take, we are going to start designing from the Medicaid and Medicare core, which is essentially the most basic reimbursement mechanism. We are going to continue working to eliminate co-payments, which eliminates a large portion of the population that can't do it. And we're going to design it in a way that allows for providers to collaborate and to receive reasonable reimbursement for their services, while at the same time automating some of the pieces that you cannot afford to deliver. And so we believe that level of automation discovers, delivers, and pays for treating the disease without establishing that competition that we're hearing.
I think you hit on a really important point, that often isn't part of these conversations. But I sit on the board of a hospital, and understanding how the payment incentives and the reimbursement is a very important part of ensuring that care for liver patients is prioritized within an institution or within a system or within a design. But you also hit on a very important word, coordination. And so, Dr. Kumar, one of the things that seemed most attractive about the model that you have discussed, the very integrated, co-located model, is that it takes a lot of that coordination burden off of the patient. I also want to get to the word nutrition that you had in the model. So, how are you able to make this more coordinated and less more frictionless, if you will, for patients? And how do you hope that helps improve outcomes?
Yeah, so we're really lucky because the hospital and the medical college has really supported our efforts for this. So we have a patient navigator who's a nurse. And so anytime we get a referral into our clinic, we have the patient navigator review the records from the patient, usually internal referrals, but they review the records. The nurse does a risk stratification and says, okay, you have, a high FIB-4 score, indeterminate FIB-4 score. You're going to be seen in our clinic. We're going to do additional testing. And you need to see an endocrinologist. You need to see a cardiologist. Everyone sees the dietitian, and everyone has to see the hepatologist. And so the patient navigator is able to coordinate all of that, and it completely takes the burden off of the patient. If they are in the low risk category, because they've already been referred to this, to us, we actually have the patient navigator coordinate just a FibroScan only visit to just double check to make sure that the no risk of advanced fibrosis. And we send them back to their PCP with a letter saying, hey, I have low risk of fibrosis, follow up maybe in a year to reassess. So one of the great things about our model is that we have a patient navigator who serves as that coordinator and sets up all the appointments. She introduces the program to the patient, and they know exactly what they're getting into. And really, they have to do nothing except show up fasting.
I love that. For many patients, though, they won't have access to that wonderful co-location model, and will have to knit those pieces together. For the other panelists, is there a role for some type of nurse navigator who still plays a role and is available to patients to knit together the right elements and services that we've been discussing, even if some of them are in the community? I'll ask Joe.
No, absolutely. If you think about what Dr. Kumar is saying, is that essentially there has to be someone in the middle making a set of decisions that forward the patient to certain levels of care and certain activities. A lot of those decisions, first of all, many primary care providers are not even aware of the condition. If they are aware and they keep it top of mind, then not all of them are well trained to do that. In Dr. Kumar's case, she has a set of people that are well trained on a protocol, but that protocol can be effectively put in a computer algorithm. And so imagine that instead of having a nurse navigator that coordinates all that, you plug in a computer program to your EHR, which takes the information, which analyzes the information, which communicates with the patient, which sends the patient where they need to go, and decides when the tests are necessary based on some internal, easy to manage parameters that are approved by the FDA. And you can do that without paying the salary necessary to do that for millions of patients. How do you create a robot that emulates that nurse coordinator and that connects the patient only when necessary and when that human touch is going to be critical to a human? But the rest of it can be fully automated. So how do you democratize it? You essentially automate everything that can be automated. You plug it into every doctor so that you take the burden of making decisions that they're unaware of or don't feel the need to do. And then you triage the patient to where they need to go. For the complex cases, you send them over to, a referral network of specialists. And for the simple cases, you keep them with little effort and with reasonable reimbursement to oversee.
Interesting. I do want to ask and probe a little deeper around when is that human touch necessary? And maybe Dr. Dinani, since you're shifting between very different cultures, even just within the United States, from New York to North Carolina. Even if we get our EHRs and our automations and the technology infrastructure to connect the pieces, from your work with so many different types and profiles of patients, what are the human needs? What are the psychosocial needs that still will need to be met somewhere along the way in this?
So, just going back to Joe, I think there is a huge need to digitize some of this stuff because there's only so many people and so many navigators that we can have. But, Donna, you bring up a great point. One of the challenges or one of the things that I recognize with, the multiple, things that I've done with pathways of care, developing these clinics, is that the human touch is very important to a patient. One, when you start talking about liver health, it just brings a new element of anxiety in a patient. And the simplest example is, a lot of these patients have been overweight for a long time. A lot of these patients have been diabetic for a long time. They've already been preached, hey, you need to watch your sugars. Hey, you need to watch your weight. But I feel like when you bring the liver element into it, it just kind of heightens, I need to start thinking about this. And I bring this up specifically through a program that we ran where we actually modeled the diabetes prevention program for patients with type 2 with NAFLD, and we found very quickly that patients had very different needs. And when you talk from a nutrition and dietitian standpoint, so there's elements of how to eat healthy in this program, for instance, we couldn't talk about carbohydrates in general to the participants in the program. Because what a carbohydrate, for instance, like for myself, if I was a typical South Asian who ate curries and rice all day, if I start preaching to someone like myself about pasta and bread, that doesn't connect. I don't connect to that. And living in New York City, I saw diverse populations, lots of different languages. So what we learned very quickly is that you have to start, that human touch is important because you need someone who's savvy enough to be able to deliver that very patient-centered nutrition or dietitian support. The other thing that we've also learned in literature as well is that there's reasons why people have certain relationships with food or why they don't exercise. And I think addressing some of those things, it'd be great if we could do it automated, but I think the human touch there is important. And I think seeing a clinician in person, or whether it be a nurse, at multiple points during their journey is important because it allows for reinforcement. So while digitization is huge and important because it allows streamlining and getting people to where they need to be, patients need that encouragement, reinforcement, and feel like you're really like advocating for them, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. At GLI, we trying to test several different things, from a nutrition app that will help people be able to culturally customize their diet and reconcile sort of maybe differing diet recommendations, as well as peer mentors of more experienced NAFLD and NASH patients to help answer some of the questions that people might not be willing to bring up to others. But also back in the digital space, I've had personal great experience with a virtual coach, and so as we think about how to scale this with the right level of high tech and high touch, of something that's both standardized, to Dr. Fuchs' point, but personalized. I think that's our challenge. But it sounds like we have a lot here to work with. Joe, did you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's important for us to change our way of thinking, because while what Dr. Dinani says is very important, it is impossible to have the number of people that are necessary to treat 100 million patients, right? Just in the U.S. And so perhaps there's a middle point where we can take a lot of that intelligent thinking that would go into a person. For example, you could add into an algorithm that if a patient is from Asian origin, they're going to have a different diet, and you can construct a different program that goes through that. And so when you're talking about, when Dr. Alkhouri started, he said, look, there is general nutrition applications, and then there is, prescription digital therapeutic programs. If you really get deep into the disease and you start improving your algorithms to take into account all of those things you can learn about the patient, whether it's artificial intelligence or some social snooping or whatever you want to call it. But if you start understanding your patient and you start tailoring a protocol that makes sense to their treatment, and then instead of proactively getting in human touch with everybody, you listen carefully and you get in touch with those people that truly need it, meaning the ones that are not making any progress, or that are not losing weight, or that are not engaging with the treatment plan or the application or whatever it is, then you can effectively scale. So I think that well, I agree with everything said. The challenge that I'd like to say is that we have to sprinkle a little bit of magic in there, and allow the technology to personalize until it is not effective, and constantly push the boundaries, in which case we then plug in the human contact as opposed to backwards.
So we are doing the number one job that you all mentioned today in raising awareness of NASH. But what else? What would be your number two? Either policy or support to be able to make these leading models of care more entrenched, or more available to more people. And I'll start with you, Dr. Kumar.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, there's so much that still needs to be done. I think outside of awareness, there needs to be collaboration, and we are starting to see a lot of that with these society guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
The endocrinology societies had representatives from the ASLD, and same with the AHA statement that came out. And so that's nice to see. I think we need a lot more of that, because all of us work together, like Dr. Dinani said, that, this is very much an integrated disease, and we all understand that. And in order to really push this forward, we all just need to work together. And I think whether it be societies collaborating, or individual providers collaborating, I think that's the next step, taking these guidelines and translating them into practice, and then collaborating together to move forward.
I remember my first call when we were thinking about creating the GLI NASH Council was to the American Heart Association, and they were like, yep, we'll send someone. And then the endocrinologists were like, do you know what we do? Like, we're not. And I was like, please come anyways. And they did. And then the light bulbs were like, oh, these are our patients too. And so now 4 years into the collaboration and 80 members, across the NASH Council, I think you're absolutely right that without that collaboration, we wouldn't have come up with these scientific statements across so many different disciplines. And I think it is our path forward. Dr. Dinani, so awareness and collaboration, what else would it take to really ingrain these optimal models of care for people?
Yeah, I think, Dr. Kumar touches it very well. I think now the next step really is, how do we implement some of this stuff in clinical practice? So we talk about guidelines, sounds like everyone's aware of them. Now, what do we do to do something about it? And it kind of also goes back again to disease awareness in a different sense. We're talking about, let's engage patients, but now we need to really start engaging clinicians. And this is where Joe's work, I think, becomes super important, because we have a whole bunch of NITs. And one of the things that would be nice to see is, how do we create algorithms to empower especially the first point of contact, which is our primary care and endocrinologists. Like, can you layer these, can you use these NITs sequentially, and then have some confidence in like, hey, I'm really worried about you. Hey, I'm not really worried about you. Or hey, I think I could manage you here in primary care. And I think that really is now the next step, is how do you channel this huge population into these semi-3 buckets, as, so to speak, who needs more, more care, who needs more testing. And this is where a combination of, clinical knowledge and using informatics and digital health comes in, and layering on some of these NITs and, also phenotypic risk factors.
I think that's absolutely what I hear from payers. How can they understand and segment the different parts of the NAFLD and NASH patient population to be able to design benefits appropriately? So I think you're absolutely right. Dr. Fuchs, you have a unique challenge in executing a NAFLD and NASH strategy across, as you said, the oldest and largest healthcare system in the country. And so what support would you need to make that happen?
I think we have a good start with giving some guidance, but as I mentioned before, we need to implement it now. And that is not just putting on a piece of paper, how you utilize your FIB4 for risk stratification. You actually, I think that what is very critical is that once you try to implement those algorithms, that you actually look at the outcomes. And according to your outcomes, you need to modify them. It's not just one algorithm and that's valid for the next 5 years. You have to ongoingly evaluate and modify it. We have to address what I mentioned before, resource restricted settings. Specialists are not scarce in the VA healthcare system. So we have to engage, learn more and more to be engaged with new technologies, as Joe mentioned. But it's not a given that if those technologies are available, that our veteran patients are using them. So you really need to work with the veteran. And that's where I think you still need, and where it is crucial to have what I would call an NAFLD and nurse navigator to give a personal touch to guide the patient through this. Otherwise, there are many patients lost, they give up, and they don't follow. So I think that's crucial. We have nurse navigators for colorectal cancer screening. So there should be a nurse navigator for NAFLD care. I mean, there's no question in my mind.
I agree. I think we're putting that on the GLI advocacy list now. Dr. Alkhouri, what would you like to see to help you scale the type of care that you're putting together?
Well, I think everything we're talking about potentially will change once we have FDA-approved medications for NASH. I think, this is going to change how we do everything, because then you really have to segment the patients into those that will need pharmacologic treatment. And most likely this will be prescribed by hepatologists, gastroenterologists, at least initially. Although for a disease like NAFLD, we need primary care physicians and endocrinologists to be comfortable with these new medications. But I suspect that initially it's going to be mainly us hepatologists and gastroenterologists. And once we do that, then we need to also navigate, insurance providers and how to get these medications covered, and provide, evidence why they need to be on pharmacologic treatment as opposed to a lifestyle intervention and weight loss. And this can happen actually sooner than many people know. I mean, potentially next year, we can have the first FDA-approved NASH medication. So what I would like to see is really NASH becoming like type 2 diabetes, where you do have a multidisciplinary NASH clinic, even in the community, where patients with fatty liver disease are being treated as having a systemic disease. So it's not just a liver disease. We need to be better trained in how to manage dyslipidemia and the pre-diabetes, diabetes, understand all the options for weight loss and actually utilize them as hepatologists, gastroenterologists. And then for the segment of patients that will need specific NASH pharmacologic treatment, treatment. Also make sure that we know how to identify them and then assess response to treatment and adjust treatment accordingly. And I'm excited. I cannot wait to have an drug for NASH. And I truly believe it's going to change everything, because the conversation is going to change. When you go educate primary care doctors, endocrinologists, they cannot say, well, what are you going to do about it besides weight loss? And these patients need to lose weight anyway. Then we can say, no, there is more to the story than weight loss. And I think there's always more to the story, but I think this is the cliche argument that we hear, and I cannot wait to have a counter argument. No, we do have medications for specific patients.
I think that will have implications not only for liver health, but for population health and public health if done in that way. And so, Dr. Rubinsztain, I will give you a very brief last word on one thing you'd like to see to advance leading models of care for people living with NASH.
Absolutely. I think that we need to establish a reasonable compensation system as well. In other words, either finding rewards for screening patients, whether they're tiered or related to quality metrics or related to performance bonuses, whichever, and then effectively sending the patients to the right level of care. And that's number one. And the second one is, while very slow, shifting from a transactional fee-for-service model more into a value-based payment system where we can reward providers for the outcome of the patient as opposed to the activities that we do, because there's always more profitable activities. Gastroenterologists are going to do screening colonoscopies. They're not going to do, NAFLD or NASH screening unless it impacts their reimbursement levels with the right set of rewards. And ultimately, you know how they go. First, they reward you, and then if you don't do it, they punish you. And that's how you shift the perspective of the population.
But since we are the field, we can set up a positive, and I agree, a patient-centered, value-based care model that rewards outcome and rewards the type of care that you all have described here today. So I thank you so much for participating in this International NASH Day panel. And I invite everyone else to join us for our other panels and activities throughout International NASH Day, and frankly, 365 and a quarter days a year. The Global Liver Institute is here for fatty liver disease and NASH patients every day. So until next time.